So again, so I'll just give you a brief overview of what we are going to cover in the course of the session. So we'll cover the basic definition of conservation, something that all of you are already familiar with. You have come across this term in your environmental studies. It's all over the media. It's quoted as a byword, as a very oft used word in mostly everything right now. You see these sporadic protests, sometimes reported in the media, most often it's not, about little issues that keep coming up. So you are familiar with the term. Then we will move on to what lies beyond this term, what conservation actually means right now in the current context, the politics associated with the side. Then we will look at a few heroes of conservation, popular faces that you might know associated with various conservation movements across years. Who knows, some of you might become the faces in future of such movements. We'll go through a few activities. Most of them, I mean, I hope you would participate in them. I mean, I think I have to again apologize for something. I did not know there would be participants from outside India. Many of the examples are India specific. So apologies to Zahra, I believe. She said she was from Karachi. Most of the examples are India specific. Some of them are global, but I think you should be familiar with many of them. And then we will eventually go on to a few pressing issues and what we can do about it. So that being said, we'll just start off. So again, the definition of conservation you're all familiar with is just the protection of natural resources, as you have heard. And you know a few examples every year, especially, uh, I mean, I think it happens every 4 years. The Tiger census gets done. It had happened in 2019, I believe, when whoever is in charge, whichever government, they come out, they say that, okay, the tiger population has increased X times during our regime. This is what we do. Important things that are left out during such call outs is that people don't talk about what do these increasing tiger populations mean in terms of more tiger density in habitats of the same size. What are the methods which have been used to estimate these populations and how correct they are? Because you see, these are statistical methods, and obviously no one is going out there and counting each animal one by one. These are estimates at best, and they are actually given out in the form of a range, so they're not necessarily correct or very accurate. But all that information gets lost somehow. And as we'll find out, one of the key figures in the conservation movement of India and the subcontinent actually has called out against the methods used to estimate these census numbers. But all these data actually play a very pivotal role in conservation. Again, things that we will see later. This slide ends with a quote by someone who you might know, a very famous figure again. She started off as a chemist, actually. She was interested in biology and then she became famous for her writings. But again, one of the pioneer conservationists of the world. So, one of the key things that when I talk about conservation to people, I mean, granted that the understanding for conservation itself is broken at many levels. Many people do not associate conservation with a lot of important things it should be associated with. But one of the things that even Aditi, I think, was pointing out was we talk about conservation. Are we talking essentially about protecting animals or flora and fauna which have been there for a long time? Does it not involve anything about exploration of the new? So that is something that we need to really clarify. So if you see here on this slide, there are two images. One of them is a red panda, uh, curiously arboreal creature, very cute, very popular, found in the Himalayan forest, subtropical, almost evergreen forests in the Himalaya, mostly in the eastern Himalayas, because only those Himalayas they have rainfall sufficient to sustain those subtropical forests, and they are at a risk. They are endangered because their home is under threat of habitat destruction, which is a common cause endangering many animals. What is interesting is that the pit viper that you see, which can be seen in the second slide, is one of the many reptiles which has been discovered in the Arunachal Pradesh, in one of the states of the northeastern part of the country, which keeps churning out new discoveries every year. So so one of the founding ideas of conservation is that we must protect few species, let's say a species like the red panda, because we must not let those go extinct. Why exactly? We will just revisit in a couple of minutes. Um, which is fine, right? Which is something that all of us are familiar with. We talk about creatures such as the black and white panda in China. We talk about the polar bear. We talk about penguins, and we look at these steps, these measures which have been put into place, these petitions, campaigns which are afoot, which all talk about protecting them or putting mitigation measures in place in order to prevent their getting more endangered or becoming outright extinct. But what are the new animals which are discovered? Um, there are reptiles which have not been found before, which are coming up. We are discovering new populations of whales in places that we thought that didn't exist. So are these not important? So herein lies a very important thought. Every creature that you see is like a missing piece in a jigsaw puzzle. Ecology, when we talk about it, it's such a rich, dense fabric that even if we remove one component, we don't know how it is going to unfold the rest of it. It might just fall apart like a stack of loosely built cards, or it might sustain for some time, look for alternative in some way, like the coral reefs are doing right now, and then it might eventually go its way of destruction. So while it's important for us to keep steady in our pursuit of understanding which animals are actually nearing their endangerment, are becoming extinct, are being threatened by activities that are happening, be it climate change, be it habitat loss, be it something as simple as unnecessary intervention of human beings. Maybe people are feeding squirrels around the forest areas too much, and they are becoming over dependent on human beings, something as simple as that. While we should keep track of that, it's also important to find out what new animals are we discovering, because those are the new indicators of how these puzzle pieces will actually unfold. So imagine this, if we were basing our understanding of an entire ecology only on certain variables, on certain animals, and we suddenly find out that a new animal, let's say X, has been discovered, then that shakes the entire thing. Then we have to rethink of, okay, this new creature X interacts with the environment different way. So does that mean the solutions that we were proposing, does that need a change? Hence, while we should be, again, as I mentioned, keep steady in our pursuit of protecting whatever species that we know, we must also be relentless in our search for new animals. And as the new discoveries every year point out, there is no dearth in them. And this is not, again, restricted to small animals, flies and insects we keep discovering, because they are also, I mean, they're understudied. They are not key, species. They're not apex indicators, which again are terms that we will, keystone species, which are terms we will explore soon enough. But these also extend to huge animals like whales. Because believe it or not, because there are pockets still in the world where we don't know what animals exist. So let me start with a bit of a backdrop. So you must have noticed that when we talk about conservation, uh, the efforts, all of them are highlighted towards a few creatures. They are touted as the faces of a movement. We don't talk about frogs because, number one, they don't draw as much traction as a tiger does probably. But we don't talk about insects. For example, we are not bothered about a particular form of water bug becoming extinct, primarily because, let's say, there are too many in number, they can reproduce faster, not under risk of extinction, but also because um, but they're part of the ecosystem, right? They are probably under the same levels of threat, if not as intense. They're under the same levels of threat, under the same threats as they're affecting the other creatures, but we don't talk about them as much. So why we do that is that when we look at a problem, an ecology, we try to break it down because it's too complicated. We just approach it in the same way we approach any other business problem. we will look at the key indicator um, which will determine the health of the overall system. If I link this to Zara's question, so let's say we compare again, sorry, I will pick up the south part of India again, a very India specific example, but I think it will be prevalent to everyone in the subcontinent. We pick up the problem of water. Okay, so we know that water is okay in the northern region of the subcontinent, especially in the regions which are fed by streams coming down from the Himalayas. Because there is permafrost over there, we have had steady resources of snow, which are melting, no doubt, but they're still there. So water for now is not that big a concern over there. Or this is how it is done. That's how the streams there are born. But what about water problems or natural resources of water to the south of the country, the south of the subcontinent, in fact? So if you see places which are not blessed with large amounts of snow reserves, which can be melted over decades and centuries to provide fresh water, in spite of rising climate levels, then we bank on a few things. We bank on reservoirs which are formed primarily because of forests. You can see that in Sri Lanka, you can see that in India, in the southern part where there are the Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats, which act as water reservoirs. They are thickly forested areas which their own peculiar level of vegetation, which cannot be found. Sorry, that was a power cut. I just switch on the light. Sorry for that. Um, so their own peculiar level of fauna, which is not identical to the Himalayas. So these forests actually act as water reservoirs. So now let's connect again some animal, let's say the tiger, to this problem of water in the southern part of the subcontinent. So how is the, let's say, tigers becoming less in South Indian forests or entire forests of the Western Ghats in that very fragile region we call the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, connected to the water problem? Simplifying the entire problem, let's for just a moment step back, look at entire thing from a 30,000 feet view. So we consider tiger as an apex predator. It's one of the creatures which is an indicator of the overall health of an ecosystem. So tiger prey upon deer. So deer, I mean, for tiger to survive, for a healthy tiger population to exist in area, you need to have good amount of prey population, right? So that would mean a lot of deer, wild boars, etc., herbivores, which normally feed on plant life. So let's say for a brief moment, we remove tiger from this equation. Why are we removing tiger? Because tiger is an apex predator. They are under threats because of various reasons. Under poaching, they are more likely to become extinct as compared to, let's say, a deer. Now that we have removed tiger from this equation, the herbivores are still there. The apex predator, the one which was keeping their population in check, is no longer there. So now the populations of these herbivores increase manifold. There is no check of a carnivore to keep them in place. And these populations are increasing, and soon they're consuming more vegetation than they were doing when tigers were there. And this in the context of Western Ghats, which have montane grasslands with few pockets of dense vegetation called sholas in place, which conserve the water, is a disastrous thing. Because then it would mean that those areas are now being desertified, and those areas are not being able to hold in water as much as they would, because uh, again, as I mentioned, the shola forests, they are required, those vegetations are required in those pockets to hold in water. If those vegetations are not there, those clusters of vegetation, they won't be able to retain moisture, they won't be able to feed those underwater reservoirs or aqueducts or ground streams. Hence, the water volume in the rivers will decrease. And this is what can happen when you remove one single creature from the mix.